Hello everybody, thank you for tuning in. Welcome back to Coding with Carlos. I'm Carlos. Today we're going to be going through a pretty simple Python program. It's a number guessing program. A lot of times when people are starting out, they're trying to find Python projects that are going to enable them to grow and improve. And one of the ones that usually gets mentioned is a higher or lower number guessing game. What I would like to do is to develop it in 3 different difficulties. One where it's very simple, you get one guess, 1 out of 10. Another one where it gets a little harder, you can have multiple guesses, and so it's going to be a larger range. We're going to go to about 100. And then the third one, a more complex version, is actually going to be using a graphical user interface with the Tkinter module. We're going to go through all of them. Instead of trying to do a live coding or even talking about it while I record myself coding, I've actually taken it and thrown it into a PowerPoint. I'll explain as I go through. If you like this method better, make sure to comment. If you don't like it, if you have any other suggestions, or if you just really want to reach out to me, throw it down in the comments and we'll see what we can come up with. Okay, so as you can see here, we're going to start out with the number guessing game, simple. Here's what the overall code is going to look like. Don't worry, we're going to talk through it as we go. So here's an example of what it's going to look like when it runs. Enter a number 1 through 10. The player can enter a number. I chose 7. Sorry you didn't get it, but it was 9. The way this works is from the random module, you have randint, meaning random integer, and you just need 2 simple variables. Random number, which is going to generate a random integer, 1, and then you can choose whatever you want it to be. I put 10 here because there's only one guess. Then you need the number that the player is going to enter. So we create a play num. Input is what's going to create the little window that the player was able to enter the number into and what you want it to say. So enter a number 1 through 10. And then whatever they enter is going to be a string. If you want to do any of the mathematical functions with it, you need to change it to an integer, which we'll do with the function here. So now play num is going to have whatever integer that the player enters. Then we do a simple check. If the random number that was generated is the same as the play number that was entered by the player, then we can print, you got it. If not, then we're going to tell them, sorry, you didn't guess the number, and then tell them what it was. This was probably the simplest version that I could think of. Hopefully it gives you an idea of the power of the if-else, and then not only creating a number with a random number and the random integer, but how to get input from the player, how to change it into a form that you can use for other things. Now we're going to jump into the harder version of the guessing game. The harder version is going to allow multiple guesses. It's going to have a larger range because if it's just 10 and you have 5 guesses, it's going to be too easy. As you can see, it's much longer because it has to run in a while loop. We have more checking to be able to go through it. I know this looks like a lot. We're actually just going to break it down piece by piece. I'm going to start out with random and the randint function. Module, excuse me. So again, we're going to have a random number which will generate 1 to 100. We'll also have the play number variable. Input from the player, enter a number 1 to 100, change that into an integer, and we're going to give them 5 guesses. The most important part of this is to make sure that the function continues running, and so we're going to use a while loop. While guess left is greater than 0, so while they still have guesses left, we want the game to keep running. Now, every time it runs, we need to take away one of the guesses, otherwise it's going to run forever. If the number of guesses hits 0, then that means they've finished the game. Either they've gotten it right, if the random number is the same as the play number, you got it, you had this many tries left. If not, sorry you didn't guess the number, it was this. And then we'll handle some of the other eventualities. Elif is short for else if. It just means another if check. If the random number is higher than the play number, then we're going to tell them higher, you have this many more tries, and give them another input. Again, we need to make sure that that gets changed into an integer. Otherwise, we won't be able to do any greater than, less than, or equal to checks. And then conversely, we also need, if it's lower, you have this many more tries left. And then of course we need to put the 1 in as well if they get it right. You got it, you had this many more tries left, set the number of guesses to 0. This way if they do get it, it sets it to 0 and they don't keep trying to guess a number that they already know. So here we have some of the output where I put it in. Enter a number 1 to 100, I chose 50. It says higher, you have 4 more tries. So I entered 75. Lower, you have 3 more tries. 57, higher. 67, lower. Okay, 61. Sorry, but you didn't guess the number, it was 65. And then you just reset and run it again. So here's the code again, so you don't have to rewind. I just ran these in Jupyter Notebook. Super easy. If there's any part of this that you don't understand, or if you can think of a better way to do it, if you notice that there isn't any error checking, so if anybody were to enter anything else into the play num, such as letters, floats, or anything else that it isn't expecting, it's going to throw errors. There isn't any error checking in here. And then also, if you only have 1 guess left, it's still going to say you have 1 more tries. You could put extra checking in to handle that. This is just a slightly more difficult version to be able to add more guesses for a larger range and show the while loop and the different if statements. Definitely feel free to take it, customize it, add in other things. I would really love to see what it is that you come up with, because one of the greatest things about programming is there's no one way to do anything. There are multiple different ways to handle things, and a lot of different programmers will approach things from different directions and they'll solve them in different ways. And one of the things that I really love is getting together with somebody else, seeing how they would solve a problem and learning from them. And then hopefully they do the same with me and they learn from my methodology. For this next one, we're going to get into the complex version of it. As you can see, here's a graphical user interface for a number guessing game that I created. Tried to keep it pretty simple, pretty clean and clear. As you can see, you can put in your guesses. It's going to tell you what you guessed, and to tell you if you need to go higher or lower, how many guesses you have left. Sorry, it was 99. Now, this may look like a lot as we get into it. I'm going to help break things down the way I do it, because when you're working with graphical user interfaces, you almost have to do it in 2 different chunks. There's the one where you create the interface itself, and then the second part where you create the functions and then tie them into the buttons and make sure that everything is working the way that you want. So using that train of thought, here's where in PyCharm, this is the very basic coding that you need to be able to get the interface. None of the buttons are going to do anything, but if you enter all of this, and I'll kind of walk through you a little bit, you're going to need the Tkinter, and then I just import everything, and then tkinter.ttk. What this does, the TTK module, is it uses whatever your operating system uses for things. So buttons, labels, a lot of the screen elements are going to be what your operating system naturally uses, and so it's going to look a lot more natural on your operating system. But what's really great about it is it's very portable. If you design something on Mac, for example, and then it's run on a Windows system, if you use the TTK, then when the Windows user runs it, it's going to use the Windows versions of all of the interface elements, and so it's going to look a lot more natural for them. So the 2 main things that are required to get an interface going are this root equals tk, and then the parentheses because it's a function, and then the root.mainLoop in parentheses. If you have these 2, then you can get a very basic window. And then what we're going to do is within that window, we're going to add other things. So we have our root.title, and you can name it whatever you want. Because the background of it was pure white, and I didn't like that, I did a .configure and set the BG background as light gray. And then I just went in and added labels and inputs. So the first part of it, the enter guess, is a label. So I called it max label. I try to keep the names pretty simple, but also so that I know what they mean when I look at them. So instead of just calling this 01, 02, 03, which if you're doing a very large interface is going to get very confusing and very unwieldy. So we have the max label, ttk.label. So this means that it's going to use your operating system's version of a label. We're going to attach it to root, which is this, so that means it's going to be to the main window, and we're going to have the text as enter guess. the dot grid is what's going to place everything onto the window. I like grid because it gives me more control over where everything goes. So Python, as you know, it starts at 0. So row 0, column 0 would be the upper left. And then you do row 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth to go down. And then the columns increment 0 up. So then I also wanted to have another label below the first one that says enter guess, telling them what the range is, 1 to 100. So I make a max label 2, and then I put it on row 1, column 0, so it puts it right underneath the first one. If we go back, you can see. So we have the enter guess label, and we have the 1 to 100 label. So I just stacked all these, and then put a text field right next to it. So we have the label to tell them to enter the guess, tell them 1 to 100. Now the input one, if you notice, there isn't a TTK for it. Text fields don't take TTKs, so you don't need to add that. So we have text, and then root. You should tell it the width and height because it defaults to a pretty large. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but I like to set it to a width of 10 and then a height of 1 because that gives a field that's about the same size as all the other labels and buttons. Height 1 means that it's only one character high, so you don't have a very large window. Then we set it in 2, 0, because that's going to put it right below the other one. And then this .focus _ set function means that the cursor will be put into that field automatically for the player, just to make things a little easier. Then we're going to create the button, ttk.button, attach it to the root. Text is going to be guess. We're going to put it in 3, 0. And then this sticky W means that we want the field to stick to the west, which is the left side of the screen, just to line things up and make it look a little bit better. You can of course use east, north, south, or even the other combinations such as northeast or southwest. So if we have the guess button, then we need a restart / reset button. So we're going to create that. We're going to put it right below the other one, see 4, 0. Then we're going to have the big text field, which is where all the output is going to go to. We're going to make this one larger. If you see, the width is 40 as compared to 10, and the height is 10 as compared to 1. So this gives us a larger area to work in. And then grid. So we put in row 0, column 1, so it's right next to this first label. And then column span means that instead of trying to fit everything into one column and pushing everything else over, it allows it to actually span, as in to go across multiple columns. And then we also want it to do the same for the rows. So this way it carries over and it doesn't crowd everything else out as it's trying to fill this one little cell over here. And then we'll have it sticky to the east. So let's take a look at it again. We have this first label, the second label, the input. This is where the player is going to enter their guesses. The guess button will take that, run it against the functions in the background, which we're going to get to. Restart will clear all of that out and restart the game over. And here's the text field where everything's going to go. As you see, it's going to allow the player to see what they entered, so they don't forget. Tell them what they need to do, how many guesses and stuff they have left. Now, if you've been following along and you've typed all of that in, you're going to have this window that doesn't actually do anything. The guess button won't do anything, the restart button won't do anything. So that means we need to go ahead and add the functionality behind it. There are two main functions that we're using for this. The first one is the game itself. So we're going to call that make guess. This method is just so that I can run the command from a button press. You don't have to worry about it too much, but it is important to have something in there. So the play num, if you remember from the other ones, is what the player is entering, but in this case they're putting it into a window. So we have to use this command, num input, which was the field that we created, .get. This 1.0 means get everything up until the last part of the field. It gets a little complex. I have to admit I don't quite understand this 1.0, but if you put this in, it's going to copy everything out of the input field, turn it into an integer, tie it to this variable. Now, the number of guesses left, if you see here, is vars.guessLeft, because we actually created a class for it. This enables us to track the variables without them being outside of namespaces or inside of namespaces. When you're working with interfaces, just because there's so many areas and trying to pass things in and out of functions can get very complicated, I found that working with classes to keep track of it all makes things a lot cleaner and a lot neater. So, same as the other one, but because everything is running in here and you can't do a dot insert into a field and then have commas and everything, because it can't work with tuples, everything has to be a string. So we had to create a variable called guess text, where you have this many guesses left. So we can tie it all together, get this string, and then we can use this dot format to attach how many turns you have left. I know it looks a little complicated. At a very high level, what this does is it tells you, here's what number you entered, you got it right. If you get it wrong, then it says, here's the number you entered, sorry, but the number was actually this. And you see the dot format. These two curly braces, they get filled in with whatever variables you have here, or you can even just put strings. So the string of play number that you entered, and then the string of vars.random number, which is the random number that was generated. So those will be put in here. And then we have, again, to be able to format the string, I created a variable called high. It's going to be the string of the player number, and then tell, go higher, add the guess text here. Trying to get it so that the variable was being added into the string caused me quite a bit of difficulty. Here are the two workarounds that I came up with. One where you create a variable and then attach the strings together, or the other one where you use the dot format and then put them in. This one can get, the dot format one can get a little unwieldy because you see it gets so long, and a lot of Python editors don't like when lines are over a certain length. So I kind of mixed them together, but also to give you an idea of multiple different ways to solve the same issue. So again, it's going to check if it's higher, check if it's lower, check if you got it. If you do get it, then it needs to set the number of guesses left to 0 so the game ends. And then when you hit the guess button, it's going to delete whatever's in the num input field and then set the focus there again. Then of course we need to have a clear function, otherwise the restart button isn't going to do anything. So this is going to delete what's in the input field, set the focus there. It's going to take the game text, which is the big field where all the game itself is running, clear that, set the number of guesses left to 5, and then generate a new random number. This is all important because if you leave out the number of guesses or the random number again, then when you restart you'll still have the same number of guesses, or even worse, you'll be guessing against the same number, which takes a lot of the fun out of it. So now that we have these two functions, we need to tie them into the buttons. So we're going to go over to the guess button and the restart button, and then we're going to add in the command equals lambda, and then the two functions that we created, make, guess, and clear. You can put whatever you want to go into it. This is the method that the function is going to be expecting. It doesn't matter what you enter, just any random string really. But what this does is it allows the button itself to run the function, and it doesn't do the checking until the button is pressed. This is just to ease debugging and making sure that you don't run into errors, because a lot of times you have to have the function created before you actually make a call to it, and the lambda kind of removes a little of that issue. So here we have the class that I was talking about and the different modules. This just needs to go up at the top. See, class vars, we just have two simple variables, the random number and the number of guesses left. So there you have it. If you followed along with all that, you should have 3 different methods of doing a number guessing game. A simple for 1 guess, a harder one where you can get 5 guesses and it runs in a while loop so you can continue making guesses until you get it right or not. And then the more complex version where you have a graphical user interface, and the methodology of building out the interface and then tying the functions that you've created into it. Hopefully you were able to follow along. If not, if you have any questions, go ahead, throw them into the comments. If you did come up with something better, or if there's something that I overlooked, please make sure to let me know, because not only would I be able to learn, hopefully everybody else can learn from it as well. And if you did enjoy it, please consider liking and subscribing. that will really help me reach other people, and it'll also motivate me to create more of these videos in the future. If you have any suggestions for other projects or anything else that you would like us to go into, definitely shoot it over my way and let's see what we can get into. Until then, everybody, take care and have fun.